And to elaborate on this, Marcus Papadopoulos, political commentator, joins us via Skype. Marcus, European leaders have rejected Iran's 60-day ultimatum calling for calm and de-escalation. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has since said European regret at America's actions isn't good enough anymore. What are your thoughts?
Well, Iran is a self-respecting country that entered into the JCPOA in goodwill and has fully complied with this agreement. Therefore, it is completely understandable for the Iranians to feel angry, frustrated, and to give the Europeans an ultimatum. Whilst I appreciate that the Europeans, specifically France, Germany, and Britain, are coming under tremendous pressure from the Americans, nonetheless, all three countries are big boys. They are global players. They entered into the agreement with Iran. Therefore, they are under a contractual legal obligation to fulfill the requirements. And the Europeans have to stand up to the Americans. They have to say to Donald Trump, we will continue trading and investing in Iran, and we will continue trading and investing within America. If that is an issue for Berlin, Paris, and London, then quite frankly, they are only independent on paper. In short, they are nothing but vassal states of America otherwise.
Now, the war hawks in the US have been beating the drums of war louder and louder. Is this saber rattling, or are we seeing the beginning of something more destructive in the region?
I think the American decision to send a task force to the Persian Gulf, comprising of an aircraft carrier and a B-52 bomber, is provocative, it is aggressive, but I believe it is posturing. Yes, we can't rule out the possibility of the Americans launching some sort of a military attack on Iran. After all, with Trump in the White House, this constitutes an opportunity in a lifetime for those on Capitol Hill who want to overthrow the Iranian government and who want to destroy the Iranian revolution. But that said, I still believe the Americans try to bring down the Iranian government through economic means, specifically sanctions. Iran, after it's not Iraq. Iran has a very powerful, very large, very well-equipped, very well-led military. And of course, should the Americans embark on some sort of military crusade against Iran, the Americans wouldn't just be up against the Iranian military. They would be up against vast numbers, perhaps millions of Iranians who would head to the front line. So my view is that this task force in the Persian Gulf is posturing, but it's not going to lead to a military strike against it.
Well, thank you very much, Marcus, for your insight, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. The French president is not stopping his sweeping socio-economic reforms despite constant protests. Emmanuel Macron's latest plan to overhaul the public service sector is also facing a firestorm of rebukes from every major union, with a wave of strikes. Our correspondent Ramin Mazaheri reports from Paris.
An unprecedented day of strikes hit the public sector in France amid ongoing protests by the anti-government Yellow Vest movement. 30% of air flights were canceled, schools were closed, and massive demonstrations were held across the country. President Emmanuel Macron continues to defy public opinion by pushing ahead with right-wing, austerity-inspired reforms. The government has just unveiled its plan to slash 120,000 government jobs by 2022, despite near-record high unemployment and a lost decade of economic growth. The public job cuts provoked an almost never-seen unity in the streets among all of the country's 9 major unions. Macron claims the changes are required in order to radically transform France's model of public service, which is more extensive and more egalitarian than most Western nations.
Macron's actions repeatedly show that he is trying to destroy public services in order to privatize them. Unions, workers and voters realize that the French state is being dramatically weakened because public sector jobs don't exist to make profits for shareholders, but to serve the French people.
Opponents say that public services have already been gutted by 9 consecutive austerity budgets, and that other sources for savings can be found, such as among the wealthy and corporations. Public sector job cuts appear certain to increase the burden on the poorest sectors of French society, as they are the most likely to use government services.
We cannot keep firing transport, postal and hospital workers. We have to inject money into our public services because they're so vital. We know that people are annoyed by strikes, but they will be much more annoyed if public services are privatized, because that only produces major inequalities.
Unions appear certain to vigorously defend their many dues-paying members in the public sector. For nearly all of Macron's first 2 years in office, France has been racked by anti-government movements, and the coming months look to be just as contentious. Ramin Mazaheri, Press TV, Paris.
And staying in France, human rights activists attempted to block French weapons being loaded onto a Saudi cargo ship at Port Le Havre yesterday. The campaigners arrived at the port after France announced increased weapon sales to the Saudi regime on Tuesday. Campaigns against weapon sales increased following a recent leak of French military intelligence by an investigative website showing that weapons sold to Saudi Arabia were being used against Yemeni civilians.
We are protesting against the arrival of a Saudi ship that comes to collect a delivery of arms at the port of Le Havre and that will bring them to be used in the war in Yemen.
Why do we continue to feed countries that have a disrespectful international behavior? And why do we continue to fuel the war? The question should be put to the President of the Republic.
Turkey's president has announced that the Turkish army will start a military operation against US-backed Kurdish militants in Syria. Recep Tayyip Erdogan says the offensive is aimed at eliminating Kurdish militants from border areas. Press TV's Rashan Saglam reports.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said his country's army will soon launch a cross-border anti-terrorism offensive to flush out Kurdish militias in northern Syria. Addressed military cadets, Erdogan said the Turkish army was able to achieve success in previous cross-border operations in Syria.
You will soon clear Manbij and east of the Euphrates River of terrorist groups. The Turkish army is the greatest power against those who want to besiege the country with the help of terrorist groups.
Turkey has been infuriated by US support for the YPG, which forms the backbone of the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces SDF, an anti-Damascus alliance of predominantly Kurdish militants. Turkey also regards YPG as a terrorist organization and an extension of the outlawed Kurdistan Workers' Party PKK, which has been fighting for an autonomous region inside Turkey since 1984. Analysts, however, are not sure if Turkey will launch its offensive in the Euphrates.
I doubt that Turkey will launch an operation in the east of Euphrates right now. First, the US troops are still present in the area and have bases there, as we also heard lately that Turkey and the US are negotiating the establishment of a safe zone in the area. Both the US and Turkey cannot risk losing East Euphrates. Turkey wants the Kurdish militias supported by Washington out and away from its borders, and it seems that the US will finally work on making it happen, despite its initial plan for the area, because it does not want to lose a strategic partner like Turkey.
Turkey's operations inside Syria are done without the consent of the Syrian government, which time and again has stressed that any military operation in the Arab country without the approval of Damascus is considered a breach of Syria's sovereignty. The possible anti-terror operation, which Turkey's leadership has been suggesting for months, follows two cross-border Turkish operations into Syria, Euphrates Shield in August 2016 and Olive Branch in January 2018, which were launched with the declared aim of eradicating the presence of Kurdish militants and Daesh terrorists near Turkey's borders. Rashan Saglam, Press TV, Istanbul.
European Union leaders met yesterday in Romania ahead of key elections that will determine the political direction of the 27-member bloc. The EU are debating the best path forward in a period that has seen the chaos of Brexit alongside the continuing rise of nationalism and the far right across the region. Informal discussions were made about what might land powerful roles at the helm of the European Council, which brings together the EU's national leaders as well as the European Commission, the European Parliament and the European Central Bank. There were also discussions about the importance of the European parliamentary elections that will take place on May 23rd to 26th.
In a bit more than 15 days and at slightly different dates depending on the country, our European elections will take place. More than 400 million European citizens will have to choose between very clear alternatives. Do we still want to build together, even differently by improving things? Or do we want to deconstruct or destroy Europe and go back to nationalism? This is the choice offered in many countries, and that is what we have to cope with. This is for an absolutely crucial choice to make in the coming years.
The UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, visited WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange at Belmarsh prison in South London yesterday. Melzer, who met with Assange in private inside the prison, voiced concerns over Assange's possible extradition to the US, saying, quote, he might be exposed to serious violations of his human rights. The Special Rapporteur is on a 3-day visit in London to meet with Assange as well as British authorities. After spending 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy, Assange was sentenced to 50 weeks in prison by a court in London for violating bail conditions, but risks extradition to the US for leaking official secrets. Russia has celebrated the 74th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany. The occasion, known as Victory Day, was marked as the Russian military personnel held a parade carrying victory banners, which are symbols of fascism's defeat in the Great Patriotic War. Press TV's Marina Kortanova reports from Moscow.
35 marching military bands and over 130 units of modern military equipment took part in the Victory Day military parade in the Russian capital, Moscow. Each year on May 9th, Russia does not just celebrate its victory over Nazi Germany, but mourns the loss of more than 29 million of its citizens in the Second World War, known in Russia as the Great Patriotic War or the holiday with tears in the eyes. The Russian president's speech at the beginning of Victory Day parade pointed out that the lessons of the past war are still relevant.
Russia is open to cooperation with everyone who is willing to resist terrorism, neo-Nazism and extremism. Collective resistance to bearers of deadly ideas has become crucial again. We call on all countries to become fully aware of our shared responsibility for creating an effective security system. Our nation is well aware of what war is. It brought grief and innumerable suffering to each family.
People who remember and honor their own veterans of the army and navy, partisans, resistance fighters, home front combatants and concentration camp prisoners come out with a picture of their loved ones, those who fought or gave their lives for liberation of the USSR and Europe.
This is the 4th time I take part in this occasion. This is an important moment in our country where everyone can go with portraits of their grandfathers and great-grandfathers. My grandfather under portrait was a hero of the Soviet Union who went from Moscow to Berlin to defeat fascism in Europe.
Victory Day in our family is a holy day.